Hi, I'm Jen, and I am a coloring book artist, and welcome to my studio. Throughout my small business journey, I have designed and created various kinds of products for my shop, but at the top of everything that I've made and will probably ever make are my coloring books. Since 2023, I have released 5 different coloring books that are filled with my own hand-drawn illustrations that depict my characters doing fun, cute activities. My latest coloring book was just released in February, but with spring right upon us, today I'd like to color in a page from my spring coloring book and talk about my process with you. So please join me for a cozy moment and let's color together. But before we start coloring, let's go over what supplies that I use. I'll be using alcohol markers since they are my favorite to use when I color. I just love the vibrancy of these markers, and I really enjoy the flat and smooth coverage that you can get when using them. They are very popular among the coloring community, and actually, because of that, when I was creating all of my coloring books, I kept this in mind and made sure to use thick, single-sided coloring pages so that you can use whatever media you like without really worrying about any bleed-through. But since some markers can be extra juicy, for extra security, I actually like to use a plastic sheet or just a spare piece of paper in between the pages. I also like to use a clip just to hold everything in place and keep my book open. For extra details and highlights, I also like using a white gel pen. The one that I use specifically is from Uniball, and it goes over my colors really nicely. Now, most importantly, we have the coloring book itself. I'll be using one from my seasonal coloring book collection, which includes a book for each season. So there is the summer, fall, winter, and the one that I'll be using today is the spring coloring book, which is currently on sale for 20% off until the end of the month. So if you've been wanting to add some springtime fun to your creative routine, now is the perfect time to grab a copy. The first thing that I do when starting a coloring page is figure out what the lighting is. I ask myself, is there a clear light source? For this page, I decided that I wanted this scene to take place in the evening at dusk when the sun is just about to set. So it's not completely dark out yet, but I'd imagine that the lamppost would be turning on around this time. So I'm just taking a light yellow and adding some highlight to my frog and duck in the center. I do this first because lighter colors do not show up on the darker ones when you're using markers, and I just don't want to forget to add this in later. I also like to have continuity with my characters, so I always use the same colors on every page and in every book. And since these colors have been already picked out, I tend to color in my characters first. So my frog has 2 shades of green, my bear is brown, and my cow is a light peachy color with brown spots. Typically, I'd imagine cows would be black and white, but I like to avoid using black because I don't want the details to be lost since the outlines are in black, and I usually don't like leaving areas that are white just because I feel like it's too bright and just not my preference. After coloring my characters, I then like to move on to any other subjects, so for this page, that will be the duck and her ducklings. Right now, I'm just continuing to add the base colors for these characters, and I'll focus on adding other details later on in the process. For the mother duck, I'm using the same light peachy color that I used for the cow, and for the ducklings, I'll be using a yellow. For all other feet and beaks, I will be using an orange, and it'll be the same for all of them. Now, with all the main characters of the page colored in, the next area that I'm going to focus on is the bush that lines the archway and the wall. I'm starting with the same light yellow that I used to highlight the frog and duck, and I'm putting that on the edges that go around the arch just to brighten it up. Then I follow that up with a green base. Now, since this is a large section that I have to color in all at once, and because I want it to come out looking very smooth as an even coat, when coloring, I like to start on one side and work my way across using the brush tip of the marker. I find that the brush tip allows for more flexibility with my strokes. So when there are lots of details or small little sections to color around, I use a lighter stroke and focus on using just the very end of the brush tip to color. Whereas when there are larger sections, I like to apply more pressure to get those broad strokes to get more coverage. Another thing to remember when coloring large sections is that alcohol markers dry rather quickly. And once your paper starts to dry, it's nearly impossible to avoid streaks if you stop midway in a section. And you'll end up having a noticeable overlap even if you use the same color. So just keep that in mind when you're coloring large sections, and remember, start on one side and make your way across. Now, I'd like to add some dimension to the greenery on my coloring pages. So the first thing that I'll add are some shadows using a darker shade of green around the flowers, butterflies, and the lamppost. I do this by outlining the sides of these objects on the opposite side of where the light source is coming from. Next, I'll use that same darker green shade and use a stippling technique for a simple way to imitate the look of multiple leaves. I focus on areas where I have put down my shadows and use a couple of other greens for depth. Someday, I like to try using some paint markers for this too. I would like to add some lighter colors on top since it's hard to do that with just alcohol markers because I can't layer them on top, but I think paint markers would be a really good way to do that. Moving on to the next large section, we have the wall, which I chose to color pink. Again, I am just starting on one side and making my way slowly across to avoid any streaks. I'm also skipping over sections that are not completely connected. So for this page, I'm skipping over the bricks and the spaces enclosed with the vines, and I can just fill those in after. And as for whether you should do back and forth strokes or swirling strokes, I don't think it really matters. I usually do back and forth because that feels more natural to me, but I do find that using a swirling stroke is pretty good when your marker's drying out. It's just to get more ink on the page. Now, before adding shadows and details to the wall, I decided to color in the path where the frog and ducks are while the wall section dried a bit since it was a large section. For the shadows on this section, I'm actually using the same color that I used for the ledge. You can layer them and create shadows and depth with the same color after the first layer dries. And this is actually another big reason why I love using markers to color. But yeah, to add shadows, again, I am outlining the objects that are on top. So that would be the flowers, the vines, butterflies, and the bushes. Moving back to the path, I'm also going to add little speckles with a darker brown just to give it a little bit more interesting look. And I'm also going back to this little section of the wall just because I keep forgetting that it's here. So this page has a lot of greenery, and with pages like this, I typically like to use lots of different shades of green. I think it makes the page more interesting, and honestly, it's more fun to use different colors and layer them. Now, I can't remember when I was designing this page if I intended for this top area to be filled with clouds or more bushes or the tops of trees, but that's what I love about coloring books. You can be creative and just do whatever you want. So for me, I went with more bushes, or I guess they could be treetops. Either way, again, I'm using a couple of different shades of green and just layering them on top of each other. At this stage of coloring, I was feeling a little uncertain and I wasn't fully in love with the look of things. I honestly was thinking if I should just start over and do a different page, but I've already done so much at this point, and so I decided that I had to trust the process instead and just give it a chance, especially since I haven't finished yet. So, as I mentioned earlier, I decided that this scene would be taking place at dusk as the sun begins to set. So, when coloring the sky, I will be doing a gradient. I picked out a couple of yellows and a couple of orange colors to layer to create a gradient. Always making sure to start with the lightest color and then blending in a darker shade right into it. Okay, so we're getting very close to the end here, and with most areas colored in, this is when I like to start going in with some details. For the grassy area at the bottom, I like to do tick marks to resemble blades of grass. I'll spread them around and mix in a few bits of stippling too. I think adding a bit of texture really helps bring the page together. And like I did with the first greenery section, to add texture and depth on the last bit of the bushes and trees, I'm going to do the same stippling technique, remembering to use different shades and creating clusters in areas where I want there to be more depth and shadows. Finally, I'm going to color in the flowers. My preference for today is to limit my palette and use 3 colors for the petals and alternate them around the page. And for the butterflies, I also wanted to limit the amount of colors I use, so I stuck to 3 colors again when I was coloring them in and just alternating their designs. Now the last bit of page to color in were the lampposts. I wasn't sure what color I wanted to pick, but in the end I decided to use the same color that I used for the ledge of the wall. I think it ties in well, and typically whenever I can, I like to reuse colors to create a cohesive page. Now, since there is no white space left to color, this is when I usually go in to add more shadows to my characters. I think adding some shadows really makes things pop. Adding these details is really my favorite part, and this is when I start to feel really glad for trusting the process and for following through to the end. Another favorite part of coloring for me is when I can take out the white gel pen to add some highlights. I don't really have any rhyme or reason or structured method to where I add these highlights because I usually put them wherever feels right to me. But my suggestion is to start by adding these highlights on the same side that your light source is coming from. Then just add them wherever you feel looks good to use. I'm adding some highlight around the lights of the lamppost, and I use a bit of stippling to give the look of little bugs that are attracted by the lights. I also added some more blades of grass in the bottom. Now, usually the white gel pen signals the final step, but I just felt that I could do more with the wall. It was feeling a little too simple for my liking, so I decided to use the same color that I used for the base, and I did this swiping motion from the edges. This gives the wall a more textured look, and it gives the appearance of some wear and tear that I'd imagine it would have if it were a real wall. And so I just layered it on all around in some random areas, and also did the same for the walking path below to add shadows beneath the characters on the path. This is actually a new technique that I've tried for this page, and I think it works really well. I like how random and irregular the texture and shadows come out, giving it a more real feel to it, so I'll definitely be carrying this over to more pages that I color in moving forward. And with that, the page is complete, and here is the final look. I had a lot of fun coloring this page with you today, so thank you so much for joining me. I do hope that you were able to do something creative alongside me and that you had fun. I appreciate having you here with me, and I value your time and support tremendously. Also, I'd like to give a really big thank you to my patrons for their love and support. Here is a very quick look at the rewards for this month if you'd like to join. And don't forget that my spring coloring book is on sale now, so if you want to pick that up, you can do so on my website. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a creative rest of your day and week ahead of you, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!